Hello and welcome to Energy Unplugged by Aurora. This podcast features various experts from Aurora having in-depth conversations with key industry leaders, policymakers and academics from all over the world. It explores the hottest topics across the energy market and gives a unique perspective on major energy issues.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of Energy Unplugged, the energy market podcast hosted by Aurora Energy Research. My name is Matteo Coriglioni. I work as head of Italy at Aurora, and I'm excited to host the show today. This episode, in fact, will be centered around the topic of flexibility, the need for increased system flexibility and the deployment of new flexible technologies are some of the most hotly debated in the energy world at the moment when it comes to what are the key enabling factors for the energy transition. I'm very familiar with these discussions and issues in Italy, where flexibility has been the name of the game when it comes to energy market analysis recently. But today I have the opportunity to discuss it from an international perspective with two esteemed guests. We have James Johnston, CEO and founder of Piclo Energy, and Eva Zimmermann, Flexibility Associate in the Aurora Energy Research team. So welcome to you both. It's great to have you on the show.
Great to be here.
Yeah. Hi, Matteo. Great to be here.
Great. James, I'd like to start with a little bit with your personal journey in the energy industry. So you're a veteran of the industry with well over a decade of work in the energy world. In an energy world that has been changing significantly in many ways, from both the economics, let's say, of the sector, but also policy perspective. So I would like to start with you telling us a little bit about your personal experiences leading to founding Piclo.
Absolutely. So Piclo and was originally called Open Utility, was founded in 2013. So 11 years ago now. I've been around for quite a while. You might call me a veteran, yes. I certainly have the battle scars to show. What was I doing before? I was actually in the academic side of things. I was at the University of Strathclyde researching direct current microgrids, and in fact how the long distant future of the energy sector might come back to a DC architecture, something akin to an Internet of Energy. So I was applying at a sort of a academic lens to the energy transition initially. But I've always been entrepreneurial and I wanted to sort of build my own company. And I thought I would pivot into the commercial space and co-founded Open Utility along with Andy Kilner and Alice Tyler. The mission has always been around about the same purpose, about getting to this energy system, this network of grids that is fit for a net zero system. And over the last 11 years, we've had a number of different approaches for trying to achieve this goal. We started in a slightly different model than we're doing right now, a peer-to-peer energy trading model. And that's where we learned a lot of the hard lessons about how to innovate in this space, and where there are places where it's harder to innovate than others, and we learned that where if you are trying to innovate in a space which doesn't have a regulatory mandate behind it, which peer-to-peer energy trading didn't or still doesn't in some ways. It's very hard. So we learned and we iterated and evolved our product into our current flexibility marketplace as we're running now.
Yeah. So you mentioned you started in 2013. So maybe the natural follow-up would be, what would you say has been the largest change in the European power sector over this period of time, especially when it comes to your activities?
Well, certainly it's all about flexibility. So when we started, we were in the peer-to-peer space. Energy transition was all about renewable energy. So we were facilitating trading of renewable energy between consumers and producers. And it was in 2016 that we made that pivot to in our marketplace model away from energy trading to flexibility trading, as we saw that this was the fundamental this is going to become a fundamental pillar to the energy transition. Yes, we need more and more renewable technology being deployed and connected to the grid. I think we all agree on that.
Sure.
But actually, the hardest challenge that we face is about how do you connect all of this stuff in so it works? How do you make sure that the system is balanced? Increasingly, how do you manage all of the bottlenecks, increasing congestion, various different levels of the network? These are becoming the defining challenges of the energy transition. And we saw that, I guess, a little bit ahead of everyone else. And that's why we decided to bet the company on it. We pivoted the whole company over to flexibility domain.
Yeah, I think you mentioned several of the points that I wanted to touch upon over this conversation. I will start with, let's say, the most general one, moving over to you, Eva. So let's introduce our audience to your work and Aurora's work when it comes to flexibility. Of course, flexibility analysis, just like on the entrepreneurial side that James described, has been, let's say, an increasing focus for the players in the energy industry, has become more and more of a center, let's say the central activity also here at Aurora over the last 18 months in particular, I would say. So I will start with that general, but probably the most complicated question for you, Eva. Why would you say flexibility and flexibility analysis is so crucial right now for enabling the energy transition, as we were saying?
Yeah, I would say there are two perspectives to take on this. First is the system perspective, and the second one is the business perspective. I would like to dive a bit into the system perspective first. As we all know, and as we already discussed, we are in the middle of the energy transition, and we'll have more and more renewable generation. And what this means for the system is essentially that thermal generation will leave the system, and this will leave a gap in production that flexible assets have to fill. But also, if we go more on a detailed level, it will also leave a gap in grid services that thermal assets used to provide, and also more renewables also mean more need for grid services. So what that means basically is, I think we all already know that sometimes the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, and we need something to bridge the gap. And for this, we need flexible technologies. Pretty clear, I think. Even outside the industry, this is understood quite well. But the second dimension to this really is that for a stable grid and a functioning grid, especially one with a lot of renewables on it, we need flexible technologies, and this is essentially vital for this functioning grid. And in the end, it's vital for security of supply.
Yeah, thanks, Eva. I think that you touch upon a couple of interesting points. So on the one hand, it's very interesting to see how these flex technologies have a role both when it comes to integrating the renewables from the perspective of providing, as you were saying, the energy when the sun is not shining, the wind is not blowing. And then there is the perspective of providing, let's say, grid services, balancing. And both those things are currently done by thermal plants. But it's almost like from when you look at these two perspectives, the first one, like making sure that you have power when renewables are not generating, is clearly the one that probably even the people, the players that are least sophisticated in the energy space can understand, that the first one that they will gravitate towards and try to see what's up with flex. But the second one, the one about grid services, I would say is probably the aspects where flexible technologies are immediately needed, and they can immediately make money out of it to make sure that, let's say, a energy shift, a time shifting model works. You really need an incredibly high penetration of renewables, and we will not be there up until the next 10 or 15 years. But already right now, the role that flexible technologies can play into the grid is enough to make the second part of your point valid, which is it's an attractive business opportunity for let's say, energy investors. And I would complement that by asking you, what are, in a nutshell, what are some of the key trends that you're seeing recently in terms of how, let's say, the conversation about flexible technologies, flexible markets, batteries is being going over the last few months? Have you seen or noticed any notable, let's say, trends or changes?
Yeah, I would see you see the whole industry getting more and more mature and more knowledge coming into the sphere. When I had conversations, let's say 1.5 years ago, basically I still started at the point of, at some points the sun is not shining, the wind is not blowing, then power is really expensive. You buy it and then you sell it again. So you sell it and then you buy it again when sun is shining, and power is really cheap. So basically, I started from these points and then I had to explain, okay, so, but also there is balancing services, ancillary services, there's grid services. And actually, this is where we need flexible energy and where flexible energy can make money. And I would say 1.5 years ago or 1 year ago, this was still news. But I would say our business also got much harder, right? Because this is by now known quite well, and questions get way more detailed. For example, more and more worrying about saturating markets, more and more questions about the grid, about locational factors. Where do I put my flexible asset? So I think the biggest trend here definitely is that the industry is indeed maturing in a really high speed.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've had for our audience, you focused mostly on Central European markets historically. That's been your main geographical focus, let's say. But that exact trend has been my experience when it comes to discussing this type of issues with you. The level of sophistication of the industry is definitely increasing. And on the one hand, we play a small role as Aurora into that, but it's also like in general more and more of the industry is looking at this with a keener eye and try and understanding better without the main challenges that indeed are much more complicated than the challenges that you would have when looking at renewables investment. So speaking of the complexity of the flex industry, James, can you tell us a bit more about how your activities at Piclo Energy fit with the challenges of the flexibility industry?
Yes, absolutely. So I think to introduce the listeners to Piclo, we have 2 products as part of our wider Piclo platform, and these products are focusing on solving what we think are the 2 key issues in flexibility. So one of them is focusing on the buyers of flexibility, the system operators, both DSOs and TSOs. This is our Piclo Flex offering. And then the other is our Piclo Max offering, focused on the flexible service providers, the FSPs, and the problems they have. So already you can see there's a lot of complexity in this space. And alongside Aurora, we take the same philosophy of trying to simplify as much as possible what's going on. That's very much music to my ears hearing that. So with our Piclo Flex offering, this is essentially an offering for system operators who want to outsource their market procurement, dispatch, settlement to a third-party marketplace. We help them find flexibility. The vision here is they need flexibility for whatever reason, whether this is a short-term requirement on a specific part of the network because there's too much generation, or it's something more like akin to a capacity contract they need over the next 5 years because they're forecasting some demand congestion because of EVs. Whatever the use case is for flexibility, our vision is they just go to the marketplace and they can find it. They don't need to think too hard about it. They don't need to specify the technology or run a program or whatever. They just go, right, I need megawatts of this shape and size and this color. or megavars indeed, and they go to the marketplace, they find it, and it's win-win, and they get it at the a competitive price, through an open auction mechanism. That's what we're doing with Piclo Flex, and that's been very successful. That was our first entry into the space 5 years ago, and we're the leading platform in Europe, and we're growing elsewhere, for example, in North America as well. Now, Piclo Max is our answer to the Flex service provider side. So, of course, Flex service providers can take part in the Piclo Flex experience, because they're the suppliers onto the system. They provide the flexibility. But what in the process of building out this offering, we recognize that Flex service providers were having, as you mentioned, Eva, increasing complexity. In our domain, that meant there was an increasing number of platforms, portals, markets, systems, rules that they had to adopt. Because as you mentioned, unlike renewable generation, where you just need a PPA, where you just sell your energy to someone, flexibility, it's all about actively making decisions all the time. That's how you monetize. And decisions means you can be stacking revenues from multiple places, multiple markets, local markets, national markets, variant A, B, and C of national markets. And we recognized that we weren't necessarily, whilst we were adding value to Flex service providers by giving them access to yet another market, these local flexibility opportunities, we're also making their life harder, because we're giving them yet another portal, yet another platform to sign up to alongside everything else. So this is what we're trying to solve with the Piclo Max offering, which we only launched this. We haven't launched the platform. We announced this in November, so it was very 2023, so very very recently, and we're launching this in February this year. So this is all about bringing all these disparate markets, portals, platforms, concepts together into a single user interface for Flex service providers. That's our vision. It's a very big and bold vision. Maybe come back in 12 months' time and ask me how it's gone. But the idea is we provide a sort of translation service between all these different concepts and translate it into a single kind of set of building blocks, covering the end-to-end process from qualifying and registering flexible assets to bidding mechanisms to dispatch, settlement, payments, and that's our vision for Max. So yes, there's a lot of complexity. How we're dealing with this is sort of providing these two product offerings: one focused on the system operators, helping simplify their interaction, and one focusing on the Flex service providers, simplifying their interaction with this space.
That's super interesting. Thanks a lot, James. And I think that it's also quite interesting for Eva and I, as when we usually deal with the issues of the flex space, we tend to mostly be discussing it either with the TSO, the DSOs, or the people that are looking to invest into building these technologies, but actually the perspective of building this platform to make sure that let's say you can put into practice and make it operational what are some complex decisions, as you were saying, is extremely interesting. And in some ways it's similar to the job that we do, although from a completely different perspective. A couple of follow-ups. One, when talking about your flex offering for the DSOs, you mentioned that you provide these services across Europe. Now you're expanding into North America. What are the main factors you consider when looking at new markets? Or what would you say have been, let's say, the dynamics that have made it so that your solutions in some markets were more needed, and therefore also from a business perspective on your side more successful? Is it about the structure of the TSOs and DSOs, their interaction? What is the ingredient there?
Yes, great question. With the Flex offering, it is quite reactive based on the readiness of a market. We can't just decide to launch our Flex offering in a market. We need to find a sponsor client, typically a DSO, who wants to pilot or try out using a marketplace to source flexibility. Now, what certainly in Europe, with the clean energy package and the directive around local flexibility, we're seeing a lot of interest across every corner of Europe. But still, some countries are moving faster than others, from a regulatory perspective, from a trying things out perspective. And those are the areas that we've had success in. So, in particular, Italy and Portugal in Southern Europe, we've got live projects there at the moment. I'd say there's sort of two crucial ingredients. One, you need to have a regulator that's sort of forward-leaning and is looking at the future of the energy system and getting the systems and rules trialed or piloted in either sandbox environments or whatever, that they know that they need the market rules ready for the future. So you need a forward-leaning regulator, and equally you need a forward-leaning DSO, someone, an organization that's willing to invest potentially even ahead of need. The moment the volume of bottlenecks on the distribution grid are relatively small, but these are going to come rapidly with electrification of transportation, of heat in Northern Europe, and then obviously distributed solar is a mega trend which keeps going. And DSOs really need to be investing now in getting the capabilities internally, as well as procuring tools like Piclo, so they can access flexibility and meet that. So those are the two key ingredients, I would say. That essentially comes down to the appetite of the regulator and the DSO in a country to move quickly and understand and pilot things. And I think that the benefit for these organizations to move quickly is, and these countries, is they then get to shape how this works. If you're a laggard in this space, you're just going to be taking the systems and the rules that someone else designed, and adopting them. And for some, that's going to be fine. And then I think, and for others, they want to lead. Then I think, so what this means for, this is very much on the DSO side, the local flexibility market, because this is a brand new space. This is not, a market that's been around for decades. It's well understood. These organizations doing flexibility for the first time. So we're seeing, adoption and it's coming at different speeds. And I think from a flex service provider perspective, let's say you're a battery storage developer, you sort of you need to sort of be reactive as well, see where the opportunities are, and opportunities can be better or worse at different times as well. So it might be that 2024 is the year to invest in country X, and then 2025 you want to pivot a bit more investment into country Y, for example. I think collectively we all need to be a bit agile in this energy transition.
But the point of investing in different countries in different points in time is it's definitely one that we've also seen at Aurora, especially because if you look, without going outside of Europe, even within Europe, you have markets that have completely different energy economics, completely different needs, and that make it so that battery investments can be successful in different types of country, but for different reasons, and therefore at different points in time. Maybe just one last follow-up on this, since you mentioned how key the role of DSOs is for making sure that this adoption, let's say, happens as a leader, not as a follower, and for making sure that the successful integration of these new flexible technologies can happen, let's say, with adequate speed. What is there any? So coming from Italy, one of my let's say concerns is that we have, of course, one dominant DSOs that represents the vast majority of the distribution network, and so they are probably adequately equipped to invest into this type of solutions. However, there are pockets, let's say, of the distribution grid that are operated by smaller players. And I think that this situation is not only, let's say, limited to Italy. In other European countries, you have that there are one or two big DSOs, but also a lot of the smaller ones. Are you seeing, let's say, an initiative or from DSOs to invest into this type of solutions only from the biggest ones, or are you starting to see a bit of a more, let's say, consciousness about this issue also from the more local, the more smaller distributor?
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly the big innovators like NL eDistribuzione, who's a fantastic client of ours in Italy, they want to lead the world, not just Europe, and they're making big investments into this space, and the project we're doing in Project Edge across a number of regions in Italy is fantastic, and lots I can say about that. But in terms of your question, we do see an increasing appetite from smaller players. Again, it's the same characteristics I mentioned.
Okay.
There are some very small DSOs that we're seeing, for example, in Spain, that are sub 100,000 customers who are leading the conversation for DSO flexibility in Spain.
Interesting.
And we see the similar dynamic in Norway as well, and potentially in Sweden. So I think it comes down to the attitude of the leaders and owners of these organizations more than anything else. But I think ultimately, talked about economics earlier. These organizations are simply not going to be able to afford to invest in the same level of systems and scope of systems as bigger players, and that's an opportunity for an organization like us. We've got a scalable software platform. We can develop innovative economic models for these smaller players. They don't need to invest in cutting edge ADMS DERM systems. They can use the web user interface that sends off email dispatch signals. For example, there are routes into this space for smaller players. It's not economically prohibitive.
Okay.
But I think the fundamental thing is the willingness to innovate. That's critical.
Yeah. Very interesting, the examples that you brought from Italy and Spain. It seems like the innovators coming from two different, let's say, sizes and different rationales. But yeah, I think that whenever the level of sophistication and investments needed to, let's say, adapt to a new reality arises, then with that, the question of whether or not you should have a distributed ownership of the grid or a more concentrated model rises again. And I think that in Italy, this conversation has been happening even before this was the problem of, let's say, investing into flexibility markets was there. Eva, we just talked extensively about DSOs in particular, the role they play in integrating flex assets. This leads us to the broader topic of the grid and how grid issues impact flexibility analysis. In your perspective, if you were to, as you do routinely, if you were to advise a client on how to think about, let's say, grid constraints, especially if you're talking about flex investments, are these more of an opportunity in a way, because we know batteries can, in particular situation, exploit grid constraints to make money, or more of a bottleneck for flex assets development?
I would say that depends a great deal on the time frame you're looking at. To be fair, now or short term for most countries, I would say it's definitely more of a constraint, because a lot of grids in Europe are really congested already, and it will only get worse, right? We'll only get more renewables. And this currently leads to really long times if you want a new grid connection, really long lead times, basically of up to 10 years. And yeah, no one's going to make an make an investment that can only be realized in 10 years. So right now, I would see the grid rather as an obstacle. But if you think ahead, let's say 5 years, 10 years, and yeah, we have some of the willingness we spoke about of the DSOs and the regulators. The grid can be a real opportunity, real opportunity for batteries or generally flexible assets. We already have some great examples across Europe. For example, in the Netherlands, there's a platform to manage congestion, and it's connected to the intraday market. So it's a market that it's connected to a market batteries are already active on, and they only have to add their locational information, and thereby they can help to solve congestion. And help to solve congestion. So there are already examples how the grid can be an opportunity for batteries or flexible assets. However, I think policymakers, DSOs, and so on need to be nudged a bit more into this direction. Otherwise, it will be really hard to make use of it. Other points, of course, different speeds or different willingness to be open to new flexible technologies, and yeah, their location also is key, I would say. As some players just move a bit slower than others.
Yeah, I think that these trends are pretty much common. I would say across Europe. Of course, we know that in some European countries, grid is becoming already, especially grid connection, more and more of a constraint. But I guess that in a world where both on the flex side and on the renewable side, we're moving more towards distributed assets, definitely this will become more and more of a topic, right?
Definitely. And I mean, it has a large potential, right? I mean, new flexible technologies can replace and solve so many of the issues that we do have with the grid. Right now, there's often just not, first of all, the regulatory framework. And if all of this is based on bilateral agreements, there's just not the security that investments usually need to be made, because we often don't have a market-based platform. We often don't have any form of auction, something like this, where the services are auctioned. But this is exactly what is needed to give investors a bit of more security. Also against market saturation, if we really want to see more investments in the space. So I think this is the major point.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for that. I think that one other question that I had for you, James, given how much you discussed, let's say your partnership with DSOs all over Europe, and how important is it that DSOs are proactive in this space. I thought that actually in policy conversation, our analysis, we mostly refer to the TSOs as having the larger role, especially in shaping the market in a way. But it's clear that also DSOs are essential to make it so that this integration successfully happens. So I'd like to ask for your take on how do you currently see, let's say, the level of coordination between TSOs and DSOs, and what do you think? Is there an improvement that needs to happen there to make sure that this coordination is as smooth as needed for in a distributed energy system?
Great question. I think the topic of coordination between TSOs, DSOs is not a new one. This is something that's been going around for a decade. And certainly from an academic perspective, it's, there's a lot of work in progress in terms of how to design this out. The reality is, what we see is we're still very early in practical solutions being deployed. We're starting to explore this in one of our projects in the UK, where we're running the local constraint market on behalf of National Grid ESO. And there needs to be some level of coordination with that market and the two distribution networks in Scotland. And it's very clear as we're navigating this space that we're still very early in this journey. As we look at other countries, different approaches are being suggested about how this should be organized, what level of interaction and responsibilities the different actors should have, whether it's the TSO, the DSOs, or indeed the market platforms, or even, in fact, the responsibilities on the flex service providers. And I know that this is a topic that is of great interest by regulators as well. So I would say we're still very early. We're just starting, probably last year and this year, to start implementing practical solutions as an industry at scale. I think there's been lots of innovation projects in this space, but practical solutions in the real world is just starting at scale. So I think the next 5 years are going to be very interesting. I think in 5 years' time, we'll look back as this is the point where coordination really start to happen. And I think, again, this makes sense. Up until now, there hasn't been that much to coordinate on. Distributed flexibility has been a relatively small proportion of the energy sector until very recently. So the problems that a TSO instruction can have on the DSO network has been relatively minimal. But going forwards, when you have the rollout of time of use tariffs, you have the exponentially growing volumes of controllable smart EV charging, and exponentially growing volumes of controllable solar and battery, home battery systems, and let alone electric heat in homes. We're going to come across situations where distributed flexibility assets are going to be responding to opportunities at a national level and causing issues on the distribution network. That's going to happen. That's going to start happening over the next 5 years. So this becomes quite a burning platform for the industry to solve quickly. Now, as I said, there are a lot of ideas and solutions and innovation pilots coming up with concepts, trying out things. There's a great amount of literature available, but in terms of practical solutions, we're just starting as an industry.
Maybe just one follow-up on this. So you mentioned that you have been expanding into North America fairly recently. What are the main, let's say, differences, if any, that you have seen, let's say, overseas when it comes to these issues?
There's one superficial difference, and they call things differently. So it's non-wire alternatives in North America, not DSO flexibility. But that's the superficial difference. I guess there is quite a big difference in historically. Flexibility is not being procured via marketplaces, but via dedicated programs. So utilities would select a particular kind of technology, let's say a thermostat, and they would run a thermostat program. And they would select an aggregator to roll out smart thermostats across their patch to provide that demand response. And so as we're expanding across North America, and we're active now in New York, and we're recently secured a project in Connecticut, we're having to educate the market about, you don't need to select a particular technology. You don't need to say we're going to run a thermostat program. You can say we're going to run a flexibility program and leave it open for open competition. Whichever technology, we're looking for megawatts. Whatever technology comes and bids in at the best price can win. And that open approach is clearly much better for lots of reasons. But that's where we are in North America. It's an educational piece around this, this open marketplace model makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for that. I think that also over the last year and a half, Aurora has been growing quite a lot in North America. It's clearly a market that has many challenges, quite common to the European ones, as we are all in these energy transformation world, but a lot of things that are fundamentally different, and not just the names, which can already be quite an obstacle.
But to be fair, the naming convention between the UK and the continental Europe also can differ quite a lot. So we don't need to go overseas to have this challenge.
That's also true. Great. I think that throughout this conversation, I see a couple of, let's say, recurring themes. On the one hand, moving to a world where there is distributed generation and therefore distributed flexibility will make everything more complex. The operational complexities to be managed both from, let's say, the system operators on the one hand, but also for the asset operators themselves will increase massively. And therefore, there is a need to go through these complexities, both in understanding them, let's say, ex ante, to make sure you take the best decisions, to also manage them when you have the assets, these services online. It's quite key. And you're providing this at Piclo, James, when it comes to offering solution to DSOs for managing the flexibility markets, and now with the new Max platform also to flexibility service providers. And on the other hand, Eva, this is also our job at Aurora with tools like Chronos, with our flexible analysis, to make sure that the operators have the ability to understand what are the optimal dispatch decisions from an economics perspective and make the most informed, let's say, choices from an investment perspective. So given that you both work in simplifying the problem for the flexibility service provider and investors, I would ask both of you, if you were to say what is the most, let's say, the number one challenge for flexibility asset owners when it comes to respectively operating these assets successfully and achieving, let's say, an optimal revenue stacking by operating into the different markets available, James, and in understanding what are the more, let's say, the fundamental economic drivers for these investments. But what would you say is the more complicated things, the question that you get asked the most, the issue that really is, let's say, getting people stuck a little bit when it comes to fully diving into the flex space? I don't know, do you want to start, Eva?
Yeah, very happy to. So I would say the question I get asked the most is really how much flex technology do we need, and how much is enough, and where is the point reached that you have saturation and you cannot make money with these flexible assets anymore. And this is, of course, we as at Aurora are providing example to this at country levels, and we also do comparisons about this. But the hard part about this question really is that you still have regulatory uncertainty around it as well, right? Because we spoke about it. Many markets are liberalized, but especially when it comes to the grid, many flexible assets cannot really unfold their full potential yet. And we don't really, and as long as we don't have good frameworks for this, it's really hard to say how much do we need, and how many assets can actually still make money on the future market setup that we don't know yet how it will look. And what we can give as Aurora definitely is a number that is based on the current framework that we have now. But I'm pretty certain that there will be more to it, and I think this is the hardest nut to crack right now.
I would agree with that. Definitely one of the top questions that we're also asked down here in Italy. James, what about you? Now that you have launched this new platform, you are interacting more and more with flexibility service providers. What is the number one question or concern that they have from your perspective?
I think, one of the number one concern is the amount of friction and overhead there is in accessing all these different concepts. And there's a very simple solution, which is in market interoperability. That's a bit of a mouthful, but that's the solution. You have all these different types of concepts. But ultimately, all these need to be accessible via common sets of APIs, and then platforms like us can then surface up all these different concepts in a consistent way, a visible way, and all this will drive a lot more market liquidity. And ultimately the vision here is, whether you're a buyer or seller of flexibility, you go to the marketplace and you find what you need. Whether you need to source flexibility or you need to sell flexibility at the best price, you want, that's what everyone's wanting. So that's the challenge we're setting ourselves, is cutting through all this friction and these transaction overheads, and bringing it all together. We think is a huge part of the puzzle. And you add on the economic forecasting, and how can you make money from this from Aurora's side? Then you have a very compelling proposition for the industry.
Great. Well, I'd say this is a natural note to finish on. It was a pleasure talking with you both, discussing your takes on status and challenges of flexible energy markets. And also for me personally, learning something new. So thanks a lot, James. Thanks a lot, Eva. And for taking the time to speak.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, was a pleasure.
That was Matteo Coriglioni, head of Italy at Aurora, talking to James Johnston, CEO and founder of Piclo Energy, and Eva Zimmermann, Flexibility Associate in the Aurora Energy Research Team. Do keep an eye on our podcast feed for more in-depth conversations with senior members of the energy industry. The best way to do this is to subscribe on whatever platform you use. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.